Breaking. Tonight reveals a seismic shift in Westminster, one that threatens to shatter the fragile trust between the British public and its ruling class. What began as a series of quiet diplomatic maneuvers has erupted into a full-scale political earthquake, with Prime Minister Keir Starmer facing explosive accusations that his government is not merely renegotiating trade, but effectively putting a price tag on British democracy itself. The narrative being spun by Downing Street is one of calm, sensible cooperation, a technical reset designed to smooth borders and boost growth. But behind the polished press releases and the carefully calibrated diplomatic language, a much darker reality is emerging. Critics are now warning that this so-called strategy is a Trojan horse, concealing a mechanism that could punish voters for daring to change their minds in the future. This is no longer a debate about import tariffs or veterinary checks. It has rapidly escalated into a constitutional crisis of the first order. At the core of the fury is the revelation that the proposed agreement may include binding financial penalties, costs so staggering that they would act as a permanent deterrent against any future divergence from Brussels. The implications are catastrophic. It suggests that while elections will continue to take place, the power to actually change the country's direction is being sold off. If a future government, elected by the British people, decides to reverse these policies, they would face what opponents are calling economic intimidation, a bill running into the billions, payable not for breaking the law, but simply for exercising national sovereignty.
And here is where the anger turns to genuine outrage. The accusation is that this is a deliberate trap, engineered to outlast the current administration. By locking these penalties into international accords, the government is effectively binding the hands of its successors, ensuring that no matter who the public votes for next, the policy remains immovable. It is a fundamental betrayal of the principle that no parliament can bind another. Yet the architecture of this deal suggests exactly that, a system where the ballot box is rendered secondary to the fine print of a treaty negotiated behind closed doors. The reaction from constitutional observers has been swift and severe. They argue that this represents a profound shift in how power is wielded in the United Kingdom. Instead of governance by consent, we are witnessing governance by contract, contracts that the public never signed and cannot easily exit. As the details leak out, the sense of inevitability is being replaced by a volatile mix of shock and suspicion. The question reverberating through the halls of power is simple but devastating. Is the Prime Minister serving the electorate, or is he constructing a cage to contain them? This is the moment the narrative changed. What was sold as a pragmatic fix has been unmasked as a potential surrender of future agency. And for millions of voters who thought the battle for sovereignty was settled, the realization that their democratic choices could now come with a punitive invoice is lighting a fuse that no amount of political spin can extinguish. The stakes have been declared, and they could not be higher. Stay with us, because the fallout from this revelation is only just beginning.
The mechanics of this alleged betrayal are becoming clearer, and they paint a picture of a government willing to trade long-term freedom for short-term political comfort. While ministers publicly dismiss concerns as fear-mongering, the structural reality of the deal tells a different story. It is a story of alignment without representation, a concept that strikes at the very heart of the democratic promise. The proposal does not just align standards, it creates a financial tripwire. If the UK chooses to deviate from EU rules in the future, rules it has no say in creating, the cost of doing so becomes prohibitive. This is the trap that critics are shouting about. It is a subtle, bureaucratic form of coercion. By attaching massive financial liabilities to the act of divergence, the agreement turns sovereignty into a luxury item that the country can no longer afford. It is a strategy of containment, designed to ensure that even if a Eurosceptic government sweeps to power in the next decade, they will find the machinery of state locked in a European orbit, held there not by political will, but by fiscal fear. But then consider the justification. The government argues that these are standard commercial guarantees, necessary to provide business stability. Yet legal analysts point out a critical distinction. Most trade clauses are designed to compensate for commercial loss, not to police political outcomes. This clause, however, appears weaponized. Its primary function seems to be deterrence, a warning shot to any future leader who might contemplate moving Britain away from Brussels' regulatory sphere.
That's when the technical becomes deeply personal for the voter. The message being sent is that your vote has a limit. You may choose your leaders, but those leaders will be handcuffed by the decisions made today. It creates a zombie policy, one that cannot be killed by an election because the ransom required to end it is too high. This is what opponents mean when they say democracy is for sale. It implies that the nation's independence is being mortgaged, with the bill to be paid by future generations if they ever dare to seek a different path. The silence from the government on the specific figures involved only deepens the suspicion. Refusals to rule out these penalties are being interpreted as tacit admissions of guilt. If the deal were truly about mutual benefit, why the need for such punitive exit clauses? The lack of transparency suggests that those in power know exactly how incendiary these details are. They understand that if the public fully grasped the extent of the financial handcuffs being forged, the backlash would be immediate and uncontrollable. And here's what makes it worse. This is happening now, largely out of sight, in negotiation rooms far removed from parliamentary scrutiny. The architecture of the deal is being finalized before the public has had a chance to voice its opinion. It is a fait accompli in the making, a classic example of the establishment moving fast to cement a status quo before the people can mobilize against it. The sense of urgency among opponents is palpable because once these signatures are dry, the trap snaps shut.
Enter Nigel Farage. While the mainstream parties equivocate and manage the optics, the leader of Reform UK has seized this moment with ruthless precision. He smells political blood in the water, and he is moving to capitalise on it with a speed that has caught the establishment off guard. For Farage, this is not just another news cycle, it is a vindication of everything he has warned about for years. His messaging is simple, incendiary, and devastatingly effective. They are trying to steal your country back. Farage has framed the controversy not as a technical dispute, but as a moral crime. He is telling voters that the political class, having failed to stop Brexit at the ballot box, is now trying to dismantle it through the back door. By labelling the financial penalty a punishment clause, he has given the abstract legal text a visceral, emotional reality. He argues that this is proof positive that the major parties are indistinguishable, two sides of the same managerial coin, both willing to outsource British governance to foreign courts and commissions. The resonance of this message cannot be overstated. In constituencies across the country, where trust in Westminster is already at an all-time low, Farage's narrative acts as a lightning rod. He is effectively weaponising the government's own strategy against it, painting the Prime Minister not as a statesman, but as a liquidator of national assets. Every refusal by the government to publish the full text of the agreement only fuels Farage's fire. It allows him to ask the one question that resonates most with the disillusioned voter. What are they hiding from you?
But it is more than just rhetoric. Farage is positioning himself as the only authentic voice of opposition. While the Conservative Party struggles to define its stance, trapped between its own pro-business wing and its grassroots base, Reform UK is offering absolute clarity. They are calling this a betrayal without qualification. This clarity is magnetic in a confused political landscape. It draws in not just the traditional Eurosceptics, but a broader swath of the electorate that feels ignored, patronized, and sold down the river. The danger for the establishment is that Farage is no longer just a disruptor. He is becoming the narrator of this crisis. By defining the terms of the debate early, he forces the government onto the defensive. They are no longer explaining a trade deal. They are denying a betrayal. And in politics, once you are explaining, you are losing. The momentum is shifting visibly. Rallies are growing louder, online engagement is spiking, and the specter of a populist surge is once again haunting the corridors of Westminster. This is the nightmare scenario for the government strategists. They hope to keep these negotiations technical and boring to bore the electorate into submission. Instead, they have handed their most dangerous opponent a loaded weapon. Farage is using the democracy for sale angle to bridge the gap between abstract sovereignty and the cost of living crisis, arguing that a country that cannot set its own rules cannot fix its own economy. It is a potent, holistic attack that links the betrayal of the vote to the betrayal of the wallet, and it is catching fire.
As the accusations of a billion-pound bill for democracy spread, the reaction from the wider public is shifting from confusion to a cold, hard fury. This is the stage where a political story transforms into a social phenomenon. We are seeing the fracture of public trust play out in real time. Social media platforms are ablaze with the language of betrayal, with hashtags trending that demand transparency and accountability. The sentiment is no longer limited to the dedicated political fringes. It is bleeding into the mainstream conversation, into the pubs, the workplaces, and the family dinner tables. The primary emotion driving this backlash is a feeling of powerlessness. Voters are waking up to the idea that their participation in democracy might be becoming ceremonial. If a deal signed today can financially cripple a government elected 10 years from now, then the concept of the will of the people becomes a hollow slogan. This realization is toxic for the social contract. It breeds a cynicism that is far more dangerous than simple disagreement. It suggests that the game is rigged, that the House always wins, and that the voter is merely a spectator in their own democracy. Critics are amplifying this sense of economic intimidation. They point out that this deal effectively holds the nation's future prosperity hostage. It says to the voter, you can have your sovereignty, but it will cost you your economy. That is not a choice. It is an ultimatum. And for a population already battered by inflation and economic instability, such a threat feels like a cruel bullying tactic from a governing class that has lost touch with the reality of ordinary lives.
We are seeing the emergence of a people versus the establishment narrative that is more intense than anything seen since the height of the Brexit wars. The difference this time is the sense of subterfuge. In 2016, the arguments were out in the open. Today, the perception is that the reversal of that vote is happening in the shadows, hidden within the complex legalese of international treaties. This feeds the narrative of a deep state or a permanent bureaucracy that operates independently of public opinion, protecting its own interests at the expense of the national interest. The media, too, is beginning to turn. Even outlets typically sympathetic to the government are asking uncomfortable questions about the lack of scrutiny. The sheer scale of the potential financial liabilities makes it impossible to ignore. When you are talking about billions of pounds of taxpayer money potentially being pledged as a guarantee against future democratic choices, trust us is not a sufficient answer. The demand for hard evidence, for the full text, for a parliamentary vote is becoming deafening. This is the sound of a consensus breaking. The assumption that the government acts in the best interests of the nation is being replaced by the fear that it acts to constrain the nation. And as this feeling takes root, it creates a volatile environment where any spark could cause an explosion. The public is not just angry, they are feeling cheated. And a cheated electorate is a dangerous force, one that does not easily forgive or forget.
So, where does this leave us? We stand on the precipice of a defining moment in British history. The question is no longer just about the specifics of a food and veterinary agreement. It is about the fundamental locus of power in the United Kingdom. Who rules? Is it the people through their elected representatives? Or is it the binding cords of international agreements designed to survive any election? The signals of political collapse are flashing red. If this deal is pushed through without explicit consent, without a mechanism for the public to approve these binding constraints, it will confirm the darkest suspicions of the electorate. The threat for the future is existential. If this precedent is set, that a government can financially bind its successors to a specific foreign policy alignment, then the door is open for all manner of democratic constraints. We could see a future where every major policy area, from energy to defense, is locked down by similar treaties, effectively ending the era of meaningful parliamentary sovereignty. The Farage Clause, as it is being called, might just be the beginning of a new era of zombie democracy, where the body politic moves, but the mind is controlled from elsewhere. This countdown has begun. The next general election is now framed not just as a choice between parties, but as a referendum on the legitimacy of the system itself. If the government refuses to pivot, if they continue to insist that this cage is actually a shield,
they risk a total collapse of authority. They are gambling that the complexity of the deal will protect them, that voters won't understand the mechanism. But they have underestimated the clarity of the betrayal.
The cliffhanger we face tonight is real. Will the opposition force a vote? Will the details be dragged into the light before the ink is dry? Or will Britain wake up one morning to find that its freedom to choose has been sold off quietly and permanently? The anger is real, the betrayal is felt, and the silence from Downing Street is growing louder by the hour. Is this the end of the Brexit era, or the start of a much more dangerous conflict between the people and power? The answer may be coming sooner than anyone thinks. The earthquake has hit, but the tsunami is yet to arrive.